All right, this is section 8.3 video. It's about polynomial division, but let's kind of do a one step back. You may recall back in section 8.2, we were graphing the polynomials. I know 8.2b we did the inequalities, but in general, we were graphing the polynomials. And you may recall that it was always nicest if we could start in factored form, right? Because then that would tell me what the well, I guess I put it to the wrong one. That would tell me what the zeros were. So like x plus 2 gave me a 0 at -2, and the x squared gave me the 0 at 0, and x minus 3 gave me that 0. And then from there, we could use the end behavior and go on. But it was nice to start with factored form to get the zeros. But then when you get to a problem like 3 and 4, you didn't know what the zeros were because it wasn't in factored form. Okay, so factored form, good, right? Because that helps us find the zeros. So what if we look at section 8.3, and what if I'm given a polynomial and maybe my ultimate goal is to graph it? For now, we're not going to worry about that, but maybe my ultimate goal is to graph this, this big old polynomial, but it's not in factored form. Well, you could try to factor this. You might try grouping, but it's not going to work. I mean, I'm telling you, you can try it and it's not going to work. So you're going to look at this and say, oh, well, it can't be factored. Well, what that means is you don't know how to factor it, but maybe it can be factored if we can somehow come up with another plan. Okay, so first of all, let's think about what does it mean to be a factor. So go back to your elementary school days, or you might say, well, I know that, let's say we take, I know that 2 times 4 equals 8. So that means 2 is a factor of 8 and 4 is a factor of 8, because the idea is that 2 would divide into 8 evenly, or 4 would divide into 8 evenly. So when I say, is x minus 4 a factor, what I'm really saying is, would it divide into this polynomial evenly? And you might say, well, how do you divide polynomials? Well, there is a way to do long division. We're not going to go there. We're going to talk about kind of a shortcut way to do division, and that is called synthetic division. Okay, so this is kind of a shortcut way to divide. So when I say number 1 is x minus 4 a factor, I'm going to show you this method of synthetic division. It's kind of this shortcut thing to do in order to see if x minus 4 divides evenly into that big, ugly polynomial. All right, so it works this way. If I want to know if x minus 4 is a factor, on the outside I'm going to put a positive 4. So if that had been an x plus 4, on the outside I would put a negative 4. So you always put the opposite sign. Okay, so it's kind of like I'm dividing by 4. And then across this row, I'm going to start listing the coefficients for my polynomial, just the number in front. So I'll list like the 2 for the x cubed. I'll list the negative 3 for the x squared. I'll list the negative 18 for the x, and then I'll list the negative 8. So it's kind of like I said, it's a shortcut. We're not really writing the x's, even though it's kind of implied that they're there. So I've got the 2 for the x cubed, negative 3 for the x squared, negative 18 for the x, and then negative 8 at the end. Okay, so here's kind of the process. You leave kind of like a space. You leave a one-line space and then draw a line right here. And it's interesting to me because everybody thinks this is easy, but then when they go to do it by themselves on a test or a quiz, they forget how to get started, okay? So the key is, in order to get started, you just bring that first number straight down. So you bring that number straight down, okay? From there, I'm going to multiply that 2 that I brought down by the 4 that's on the outside. So 4 times 2 is 8, and that goes right here, okay? And so then I add these two numbers, negative 3 and 8 is 5, and now I start the process over again. So I would say 5 times the 4 that's on the outside is 20, so I put a 20 right here. And then I add straight up and down, negative 18 and 20 is 2. Start the process over. So I multiply the 2 times 4, and I get 8. And then when I add, I get 0. Okay, so I'm finished, and here's the thing. If you end up with 0 right there at the end, that's actually called the remainder. Not that you necessarily need to know that. But if you end up with a 0 at the end on the last number, then that means the answer is yes, x minus 4 is a factor. It divides evenly. And more specifically, what that tells me is if I have an x minus 4, the other factor comes from this answer right here. You're like, what? Well, remember how we ignored the x's, but we said, hey, this was from the x cubed, this was from the x squared, and this was from the x, and then this was just that constant at the end, right? So the answer down here is in front of x's, but when you divide, you decrease your exponent by 1. So if the polynomial started as an x cubed, then this 2 right here represents a 2x squared. And then this would be a plus 5x. And then you would end with plus 2. So that 252 represents 2x squared plus 5x plus 2. So remember, your answer always starts with one less exponent than you started with on the original polynomial. So is x minus 4 a factor? Yes. Specifically, this is the factored form so far. Okay, so number 2, it says, okay, if yes, and that's what we said, then finish factoring that. Well, here's where I am right now. Can you factor that any further? Well, on the 2x squared plus 5x plus 2, maybe we could do trial and error. So I'm going to bring that x minus 4 straight down. And now can I do trial and error on the 2x squared plus 5x plus 2? Well, let's see. Same signs. In order to get 2x squared, it would have to be 2x and x. In order to multiply and get 2 at the end, I would have to put the 2 here, right? That whole common factor thing. Does that work? Is that going to give me the positive 5x in the middle? Yeah, 4x, 1x, so that works. So this is the factored form. Now, if I wanted to, at this point, I could go on and graph it, right? I could graph the polynomial. I could say, oh, look, there are zeros at 4, negative 1/2, negative 2. Now, we're not going to go there in this section because this section is just about if it doesn't appear to factor at first, could you force it into factoring using this special method called synthetic division? Okay, so let's try another one. Look at number 3. Is x plus 4 a factor of this polynomial? Well, remember what I said. If this is a plus, then what you're going to divide by is negative 4. That goes on the outside. Okay, so now I'm just going to list the coefficients from the x's. So the 2 is for the x cubed. The 3 is for the x squared, negative 18 for the x, and negative 6. Now remember we said leave a space and draw a line. I'm going to move this up a little bit so I have some space here. I don't know why I started it so low. Okay, so remember the key is you get started by bringing that first number straight down. So if I bring the 2 straight down, I've got a 2. So then you multiply by the outside. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Okay, you add straight up and down, so that's going to be negative 5. Okay, you multiply by the outside. Negative 4 times negative 5 is 20. You add straight up and down. Negative 18, positive 20. And then you multiply. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. And then when you add, you're going to get negative 14. All right, so remember what I said. If it ends in 0, it's a factor. If it ends in anything other than 0, it's not a factor. So the answer is no, it's not a factor. Okay? And then, and what that means is you can't say that x plus 4 times 2x squared minus 5x plus 2. It doesn't work that way. So like number 4 says, if yes, well, I don't even have to do this because it wasn't a yes, right? So you can't do anything if it wasn't a yes. Okay, let's go to number 5. Is x minus 2 a factor? Okay, now here's something you need to be careful of. So because it's a minus 2, yes, you bring down a positive 2. Okay, but remember how I said you're only writing the coefficients. That's true, but you got to make sure every exponent of x is accounted for. So like I can put a 2 here for the x to the 5th, but do you see there's no x to the 4th? Well, you have to account for that. So you're going to say like 0x to the 4th. Then you would have negative 3x cubed. Notice there's no x squared, so I'm going to say 0x squared. Keep going. Then you have your negative 18 for the x and your negative 4. So any of the exponents, any of the powers of x that are missing, you have to put a 0 in there. So that's something you got to be really careful of. All right, so now I leave a space, draw my line. So make sure you get started by bringing that number straight down. So I bring down the 2, multiply and add, multiply and add, multiply and add, multiply and add, multiply and add. Okay, there it is. Notice I end in 0. So yes, it is a factor. So if I were going to write the factored form, I have the original one, which was the x minus 2. That was the one they started with. And then remember how I said these numbers represent the other factor. Since this one started with x to the 5th, that means this 2 is going to start with x to the 4th. So I'm going to have 2x to the 4th. And then you just keep decreasing by 1. So 4x cubed, 5x squared, 10x. I'm going to have to scoot this over, sorry. Here we go. Let's see. Then what did I say? 10x and then plus 2. So as far as I know, this is the factored form. There might be other ones that would work that I don't know of, but as far as I know, that would be your factored form. Okay? So let's just try one more. Is x plus 1 a factor? Now, if you feel like you've got it, then maybe go ahead. Or maybe you just follow me with the setup and then pause and then try and finish it and then see if we agree on the answer. So remember, since this is a plus 1, it's going to be a negative 1 that I'm going to put down here. So now I start with my x to the 6th. Notice there's like a 1 in front of that. So 1. There's no x to the 5th, so 0 for that. There's no x to the 4th, but then I do have 2x cubed. Notice there's no x squared, and then I have 1x minus 2. So leave a space. All right, so maybe if I were you, if you haven't already, pause it. Don't forget, you get started by bringing down the 1, and then I'll go all the way across and then see if we agree. Okay, so I'm going to bring it down, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, 2 and negative 1. Keep going, just alternating, multiply and add. Now, it may look like you see the negative 2's and you may say, oh, yeah, it's 0. No, it's not. You're adding. Negative 2 and negative 2 is negative 4. So we're ending in negative 4. So is x plus 1 a factor? No, it is not. Okay, so that's everything you never wanted to know about synthetic division.